What's going on, everyone? So today we are going over 5 more tips to help you guys win more games in Joust. And this is part 2 of this video series. And if you haven't seen my first tips video, I recommend going back and watching that one. And I'll make sure to leave a video card here so you guys can access it. But honestly, it's not a requirement, as like in my first part, these tips don't necessarily follow due to them being randomly constructed. Very similar to my first tips video, all of these tips can be as general as possible or can be hyper specific, so please keep that in mind. But without further ado, let's get into it. So starting off with tip number 1, we have minions for sieging. Now to preface this tip, this is going to be a very short tip compared to the other ones that will be coming up soon. But moving into the tip, when sieging an enemy structure without minions in the tower or phoenix, you do reduce damage. But while minions are in them, you do about double the damage comparatively. So making sure you have minions in the tower range is an effective way to siege them. Additionally, you can have someone tank some of the tower hits in order to preserve the wave, allowing you to hit the tower longer with the most amount of damage. And now this is especially important if you only have a few minions left to tank the tower. So always keep this in mind whenever you're trying to siege a phoenix or a tower without minions, as it'll take way longer with the added potential of your tank slowly dying. Or if you have minions entering the enemy structure, you know you could potentially shred a phoenix or tower due to this mechanic. And now moving into our second tip, we have watching the enemy's respawn timers, as well as paying attention to your map. One thing you need to always keep in mind and gauge is the enemy's respawn timer. After getting a kill or even wiping the enemy team, make sure you know their respawn timers, as you can use this information to see what your next play will be. For example, in the beginning of the game, the death count is going to be considerably short, meaning things like invading or taking a tower or even getting the Bull Demon King is going to be a lot harder. So if I get a kill early in the game, let's say around 1 to 5 minutes into the game, their death timer will only be a few seconds, meaning if you want to try and invade their blue buff, just know they'll be right back up at full health to defend it. And if you're damaged, for instance, you'll need to back off. Another example could be later in the game trying to siege a phoenix. Now let's say you get a couple of kills, but you don't have enough minions to take the enemy's phoenix. At this point, you're going to have to wait for the next wave to try and take it. But by then, the enemy's respawn timer will be close to respawning, so by you waiting, the enemies are about to respawn at full health to defend. So in this particular case, instead of waiting and risking it, you could have went to Bull Demon King, seeing as you're most likely not getting the phoenix anyways. Or if you're ultra late game, they might have an entire minute to respawn, which gives you an ample amount of time to kill the Phoenix and Titan, seeing as they're not coming up anytime soon. So always keep in mind the enemy's respawn timers and make plays based off of that. So moving into the second part of this tip, we have paying attention to the map. Now in Joust, it's not as crucial to always pay attention to your map, unlike Conquest for example, where you're essentially staring at your map 70% of the time. However, it is still very important to prioritize looking at your map frequently at all times, but more specifically in team fights, as there are a lot of details at play you might not be able to see by simply paying attention to what's in front of you. So being able to see what your teammates are doing, where the enemies are positioned, and whether or not the enemy is still chasing you is very important. Now I have one example that perfectly illustrates this concept. I recently played a game where I was constantly being bombarded by Kuzumbo, where he was essentially 100 to 0ing me whenever he got close to me. And as you can see, he blinks on top of me, does a decent amount of damage, and seems like he's going to follow me down to inevitably kill me. But if you pay attention to the map, he actually backs off instead of chasing me down. And if I had noticed it sooner, I would have been in a better situation to turn around right away, where I could have still been in the team fight instead of trying to catch up. And now it's a lot easier said than done, but paying attention to your map in these key moments can help you win more fights, or at the very least put you in a much better position. And now we have tip number 3, which is effective team fighting / holding your abilities to fight. Now one inherent thing to being successful in Joust is being able to team fight effectively. So please try not to 1v3 unless you're absolutely positive you can get the kill without dying. And a lot of the times this doesn't really happen. So instead of being extremely aggro or risking a death by tunnel visioning to get a kill, just wait for your team to fight, especially when you are ahead. And then also piggybacking off of the map tip I gave, make sure before going into the fight you look at who's near you by looking at the map. If your teammates are nowhere near you, dumping all your abilities is pretty useless in a team fight, as you're missing an entire damage source. Additionally, pay attention to your team's health as well as your team's cooldowns, as this also dictates whether you should go in or back off. It may look good from your perspective as you can go in, seeing as you're full health, but if your allies are trying to walk away or return to base, please follow suit, as getting caught out by yourself is really bad, but more importantly, your team may feel inclined to help you out even though they are low, which can end up in all of you dying. And trust me, I end up dying frequently due to my other teammate overstaying while I try and defend them. Moving on, another key tip is holding your abilities more strategically. If you see a potential to either go in and attack, holding your damage abilities to burst them down is very effective, or vice versa if you're trying to peel. Also, it should be noted that just because an ability is ready to be used doesn't mean you should use it. Essentially, just because you could doesn't necessarily mean you should. Moving on to an example, let's say you're a mage and you're at your wave. Instead of instinctively clearing it, hold that ability if you see potential for a fight, usually via the tank setting up for damage. Now let's say I cleared the wave instead, while my teammate was attacking. Well, now I don't have as much damage/burst to help them secure a kill in this particular instance. But being able to communicate your abilities and synergize them together is really what you should be focusing on, as having 3 people target one enemy is obviously way better than 3 people targeting all different enemies. And if you don't have good communication, usually while solo queuing, you're going to need to be much more observant of your team's abilities they have up, who they seem to be targeting, or you're going to need to prioritize VGS or in-game chat way more than you usually would. And then getting down to it, we have our 4th tip, which is deciding when to start at purple buff versus when to start at red buff. So there are 2 general basic starts in Joust, now that they have added purple buff on the map. You either both go to red buff and 50-50 the buff camp, or each team goes to purple and red buff by themselves. Well, there is a way to make an educated guess on which one would be more beneficial for your team to go to that would help you with early game buff success. You basically need to pay attention to your team comp as well as the enemy's team comp to access which one has a better early game in terms of secure and damage output. Doing a rough estimate on which team is better at clearing, securing, and doing damage can help you decide on which is a better buff to start with. For example, let's say your team consists of Hachiman, Morgan Le Fay, and Sobek, and the enemy team has an Ullr, Cerberus, and Ao Kuang. Well, seeing as Morgan has a lot of burst damage and CC in all 3 of her abilities, Sobek has incredible peel and burst, and Hachi has good burst in his 1 and 2, this makes your team have a high chance of securing it. Meanwhile, the enemy team has decent burst and secural comparatively, it's just not as good, especially seeing as Ullr and Ao Kuang notoriously have bad early game. So in this case, trying to 50-50 the red buff would be in your favor, and I would recommend trying to get red buff, especially if they are trying to. Here's another example. Let's say your team consists of Horus, Agni, and Ishtar, and the enemy team has Hachiman, Sylvanas, and Persephone. Well, in this case, seeing as Agni doesn't have good early game burst, Horus doesn't have great secure, and Ishtar doesn't really have any secure damage, compared to their team where Persephone has great burst and secural, same thing with Hachi, and Sylvanas has good early game burst with his 1, it's probably best if you concede red and take purple, as the likelihood of you getting red is pretty low. Also, seeing as you have a hunter on your team, purple buff will be much more beneficial. And now of course this tip is very general, as if you have a 3-queued team, you communicating and synergizing together can nullify this discrepancy. But for the most part, this is how you should be generally thinking when deciding which buff you want to start with. Now in my opinion, saving the best tip for last, we have the best time to do Bull Demon. Now there are a lot of situations where it'd be good to attack the Bull Demon King to allow for an easier time at sieging their tower or Phoenix, so I'll be naming off a few examples. One thing to always keep in mind though is if there is a tower that is really low, make sure you try and kill it before getting the Bull Demon King, as you'd be wasting the Bull Demon on a tower that barely has any health. Now one of the biggest ways in which you should prioritize getting Bull Demon King is when you kill the enemy team and you don't have enough time to kill their Phoenix or tower, but do have enough time to get the Bull Demon King. Or if you kill the enemy team and have enough time to kill the tower, but not enough time to kill the Phoenix, then you should go to Bull Demon King. Or in small cases, if you kill 1 or 2 of the enemy team members, but know they can still clear wave, not allowing you to destroy the tower, you would go to the Bull Demon King. Another type of play where it would be good to attack the Bull Demon King is if you are able to get them low enough where they're not able to defend it without risking death. Additionally, if you see the enemies back to their base, you can use this opportunity to attack the Bull Demon King, as they probably won't have enough time to defend it on their way back. And then in the last way, and in my opinion a very unique way, is to allow your hunter/assassin solo the Bull Demon King. Now on this map, the Bull Demon King seemingly has less health, which I highlighted earlier. And this is especially prominent early game, which means shredding it is all that much easier. So if you're ever in a situation where your other two members can coax the enemy team in fighting, then your ADC or assassin can secretly take the Bull Demon King. For example, a lot of the time where I'm able to pull this trick off is when red buff is about to spawn. And around this time, the enemy team will most likely be focusing on trying to secure red, and while this is happening, you can take the Bull Demon King while your enemy team is defending. But keep in mind that you're probably sacrificing red buff, and that you need to not all in, as if anyone dies, getting the Bull Demon King isn't as valuable. Now there are other niche examples of when it would be good to get the Bull Demon King, but these are the common times and ways in which you should think about doing it. And for clarification's sake, not all hunters or assassins will be able to solo the Bull Demon King right as it spawns, and this also depends on your build as well. So depending on which assassin or hunter you go, will ultimately dictate when it would be best to do the Bull Demon King, as sometimes you may have to wait. But if you made it to the end, you're a legend. But also feel free to like and subscribe, as these videos take a lot of time and effort, and I'd really appreciate it. But if you haven't seen my first video, I plan on making more parts to this video series, as I feel there are more helpful tips I can provide. But hopefully you were able to take something from this video and implement it into getting better at Smite, but more specifically in Joust. Comments and feedback is much appreciated, and with all that being said, thank you guys for watching.